with you all this evening and talk about the upcoming legislative session to make sure it doesn't fall down. Maybe that will remind me to pass those around. I'm Michael Sullivan. I head Texas Scorecard. As our name implies, we believe that in government, someone's always keeping score. We just think it ought to be the citizens who are the ones keeping score. There are lobbyists, and there are the bureaucracy insiders, and all these cats who spend all of their time making sure that liberty is eroded. The only thing that stands between liberty and tyranny is a well-armed citizenry. And I mean well-armed in the most actual sense of that. That's what our founding fathers meant with the Second Amendment, but also mean it in the intellectual sense. Citizens have to know what's going on. You and I have to be fully and completely engaged in government if we're going to hold back the forces of tyranny. Thomas Jefferson said that's the natural order of things for government to increase and liberty to yield. And our entire American experiment is based on the idea of holding back what Jefferson called the natural order of things. The idea that we're trying to stop the advance of tyranny, stop the growth of government. Everything about our American experiment runs contrary to human history. In human history, you see tyranny rise up every chance it gets. In the United States and in Texas, we are fighting that. The only way we fight it is if you and I are involved and engaged. I hear folks constantly say this horrible thing. They say, well, I wish I could just go back to not paying attention to government. Okay? And that is the dumbest thing a person can say. The problems we have today in our state and our nation are the result of the last 7,500 years of people saying, oh, I don't want to pay attention to government. Okay, great. Don't pay attention to government, and I'm certain that your tyrant dictator will be pleasant to you. But make no mistake, if you and I are not paying attention daily to government, that is precisely what we get. You and I have to recognize that we are supposed to be the rulers in our republic. We are supposed to be the masters of our republic. We are supposed to be the sovereigns. That's how our founding fathers envisioned this. They weren't being cute when they set the first three words of the U.S. Constitution. That wasn't some feeble attempt at seventh grade poetry when they started "We the People." They actually meant it. But our system of government only works when we the people remain involved. There is nothing more frustrating to me as a news guy and as a citizen than when I go to the Texas Capitol, whether it's budget night or just any random day during the 140-day legislative session, and there are no citizens there watching. There's no one paying attention. You and I should be paying close attention. And I know that there are folks, well, I would love to be more involved, I'd love to be more engaged, but someone has to work to pay the taxes. I hear that silly little joke everywhere I go. And I've gotten to the point now I just look at those people and I growl at them. Mainly so I don't say bad words. Thank goodness our founding fathers didn't take the view that, well, I'd like to have independence, but someone's got to pay the king's taxes. No, that they were all willing to risk their lives, their fortune, and their sacred honor for this experiment in liberty, this experiment in self-governance. And for us to so blithely say, well, it would cost me a couple of $100 to, go spend some time in Austin, to, write letters to my congressman. All those things that cost time and money. I just don't have the time and money. Well, then you don't like your republic very much. You and I have to make sure that our friends and our family get more involved, more engaged. There's this other lie that I hear regularly of folks who say, in polite company, you shouldn't talk about government or religion. I would suggest to you that, number one, I have a book that my pastor preaches from every Sunday, and it tells me I have an absolute obligation to talk about my religion, my faith. I'm disobeying the command of the divine creator when I don't talk about my faith, number one. Number two, I have a document crafted 220 some odd years ago that says you and I are supposed to be the citizen leaders of our republic. And to the extent that you and I, as the co-leaders of our republic, aren't talking about the state of our republic, we're failing in our job description. We're failing our posterity. You and I have to make sure that we stop believing these comfortable lies told by those who would enslave us, those who would turn us into their serfs. So that's what we try to do at Texas Scorecard, is help folks be more involved, more engaged, and better informed. I want to pass around a couple of clipboards. I was passing around clipboards everywhere I go. These are where you can sign up to get on our, if you want, yeah, one, there we go, thank you. And I'd love to get you on our email list and send you updates about the things going on in our state. I want to talk about two principal issues that are most passionate to me, and then I'm going to do that in like less than 9 minutes, and then we'll just have a nice time for all of us to talk about things y'all care about, and I'll try to offer you some insight as to where I see those issues heading as we move into the legislative session. But before I talk about the two issues I care about, and then just for preview, the two issues I want to talk to you about are property taxes and border security. So I want to talk about those two issues, where I see them standing. Okay, and then we'll talk about other things too. But before we have the opportunity to talk about border security and property taxes, you and I have to understand that there is a more important issue that rises first, a more important governing issue. And it's something that's been alluded to a couple of times by the nice looking young lady who's yip-yapping and the old bald guy up there. And that is the speakership of the Texas House. That is the rules of the Texas House. My dad was a football coach when I was growing up. And so it's important to understand, whatever you're doing, whether it's a silly game like football or it's the running of our republic, there are always rules. And if you think that you're going to be successful on Friday night at a football stadium, if you show up thinking that you're playing baseball, you're not. Okay, you're going to lose. You have to know the rules of the game you're playing. You're talking about sports. The same is absolutely true when it comes to the governance of the Texas legislature, Congress, or city council, whatever entity it is. There are rules existing. You and I as citizens have to make sure that we understand those rules or involve those rules. No rule that will be discussed on about the second, third day of the legislative session is a rule regarding who gets to be a leader in the Texas House, who gets to hold a position of authority, who gets to be the chairman of a committee. Chairmen of committees decide what legislation lives and what legislation dies. We've now spent the last several months with a whole lot of people, a whole lot of Republicans, people with R's next to them, telling us that the single most important thing is fighting the Democrats. Send me $10 so I can fight the Democrats, they say. Put this bumper sticker on your car that costs $15 so we can fight the Democrats, fight the Democrats, fight the Democrats, fight the Democrats. They get elected, and in Texas, what do? They go down to Austin and they put Democrats in charge. They make themselves out to be liars, and you and I turn ourselves into enablers. You and I need to stop enabling the lie. You and I need them to honest up or get out. You and I need them to do what they say, which is fight the Democrats, or you and I need to find them something else to do with their time rather than abuse our public trust. But they've been lying to us. They lie to us when they come home and tell you about all the good legislation that could have passed. Those wily Democrats killed it. Look, there are Republicans who will show you a picture on their iPad of a dastardly Democrat standing over the dead corpse of your favorite legislative initiative and blood dripping off of that knife. And they'll say how horrible, oh, look, here's the Democrat killing the legislation. No legislation in Texas in the last 20 years has actually been killed by a Democrat. Now, there might be Democrats whose names are recorded in the journal as having done something, but the way the Texas legislature actually works is Republicans control everything. The party in the majority controls everything. The only way Democrats are allowed to kill legislation is when Republicans allow it. The only time legislation is killed by a Democrat is when a Republican allows it, because that's how our system is set up. Now, again, those Republicans will say, oh, no, there are these rhinos who conspire with the Democrats. Well, tell us who. Name the names. Tell us who it is so that we can go and remove them. If they're not going to tell you who's at fault, they're at fault. It's no different than my kids. When I walk into the kitchen and there's the milk spilt across the kitchen floor, who did this? I know it wasn't me or my wife. And my son would say, I don't know who did it. It was always a clue that the boy did it. Okay? Because he was very quick to tell me when it was one of his sisters who did it. Legislators are no different. If they're not willing to tell you what specific Republicans did what to conspire with the Democrats, allowing the Democrats, that Republican was the problem. You and I have to start demanding better of these cats who've been lying to us. And ending the practice of Democratic committee chairs is the beginning. Now, that does not mean that your favorite conservative principles and priorities are going to be enacted into law. It just means the Republicans are going to have to be more honest about killing them. They're going to put their own fingerprints on that knife. They're going to have to show themselves to be the ones responsible. And that's a good thing. Transparency and clarity are good things. We need to be able to understand the real world as it exists and not the myth-making of politicians. So before you can have property tax relief, before you can have border security, before you can have any of the things that you care about as a citizen, you really need to make sure that we end the practice of having Democrats as committee chairs. When they go to Austin and they play the, oh, we're all in this together game, what they mean is they are all in this against you. You need them fighting with each other. When politicians fight with each other, liberty is preserved. That's, we have anesthetized what our founding fathers created, the idea of checks and balances. Okay. Oh, checks and balances, that sounds like, a bunch of, accountants with green eye shades sitting in a room with calculators and spreadsheets. That's not what our founding fathers intended. The checks and balances our founding fathers talked about was fierce competition of interests, which is why you had the U.S. Senate appointed by the states, why you had the U.S. House established with popular vote, why the presidency was weighed with an electoral college, and the vice president was the person who came in second place. All these things they put in place to make sure that the government was more involved with fighting each other than fighting you. Unified government. We call it, let's end the gridlock. Yeah, you know what end the gridlock means? End the gridlock means screw the taxpayers. That's what it means. Make no mistake. Government fighting among government is good for your liberty. So we need to make sure that our state reps understand that the 149 other members, Dustin Burrows, he is one member of a 150-member body. Carl Tepper, one member of a 150-member body. They go to Austin, and all too often they become too close of friends with the other 149 people. They begin to see the other 149 people as their colleagues, as their friends, as their pals. They begin to worry about offending their friends. That's not a bad thing. Just like you don't want to offend your next door neighbor, so you make sure you turn the stereo down a little bit, in the evening. You make sure that you have your friends when they come over not park in front of his house because it bothers him, and he's your neighbor, right? We don't need Dustin Burrows and Carl Tepper being friends with the other 148 members of the Texas House. You need them fearful of you. You don't need them to love you. You don't need them to like you. You don't need to be on their Christmas card list. They need you to like them. They need you to want them on your Christmas card list. But we've allowed in politics everything to be turned upside down. And this practice, this faux tradition of Republicans allowing Democrats to chair critical committees overseeing some of the most important issues of the state, that's symbolic, that's symptomatic of the disease that has gripped our Texas legislature. It's why we are now at 20 years of Republicans controlling all of state government. Every statewide executive official, governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, comptroller, all those caps, all the executive branch, all Republicans for 20 years or more. The Texas legislature, the House, the Senate, Republican dominated for 20 years or longer now. The statewide judiciary, all Republican controlled for 20 years. And yet, property taxes are higher today than they have ever been. Government has grown faster since Republicans have had complete control of the Texas government than government grew when Democrats had complete control of Texas government. Now, that is not to suggest to you that you should now go and elect a Democrat. What that is to suggest to you is that you and I have got to do a better job of how we pick and then communicate with our Republicans. And it begins with you and I being more involved and more engaged. I want to talk about property taxes for a second. I mentioned that a second ago. Property taxes are higher than they've ever been. We have a higher property tax burden now than any point in our state's history. We have the 4th highest property tax burden in the nation. When you start talking about, we should cut the property tax burden. We should eliminate property taxes. We should or at least get on the path to eliminating property taxes. The first thing you hear from little pointy-headed legislative sniveling types is, oh, well, do you want an income tax? Let's talk about that for a second. Number one, no, you don't. Okay, but that's not a real threat. That's not a real answer. Because when you look at the 9 states that don't have income taxes, there's Texas and 8 other states without income taxes. There are 8 states of the 9 total that governs it. How many states don't have an income tax? 9. And Texas is one of them. 8 of the states, of those states, have lower property taxes than Texas. Okay, so of the 9 states without income taxes, 8 of them have lower property taxes than Texas has. So it's not actually necessary to have an income tax while having lower property taxes. That is a choice that is made by politicians. It's a choice that's made by elected officials. At the end of the day, you never have tax problems, you have spending problems. And we have allowed in Texas the most gross kind of spending problem imaginable, that is with our school taxes. The amount of money that we spend in public education, and please understand, I'm not suggesting to you that you need to go shoot your school superintendent or scream at your kid's 4th grade teacher or anything like that. I am suggesting maybe you should look in the mirror and slap yourself a few times. Okay? You and I have, in our neighborhood, talk about, I assume it's a school bond that y'all were frustrated with.
Road.
Oh, road bond, oh, okay. In most parts of the state, it was school bonds that folks were frustrated with. You and I, in the name of the children, have allowed this massive amount of spending without us having any real conversation about what we expect out of public education. Is public education supposed to be a daycare system? Is it supposed to be an entertainment system for the community in the evenings? Is it supposed to be an employment system for adults? What is it supposed to accomplish? What does it mean to have an educated population to begin with? These are questions you and I need to be asking and need to be answering before we can really get serious about reducing the costs in education. A few years ago, I was invited to a monetary policy conference in Switzerland. And I will just suggest to you, if you're going to go somewhere to be bored, Switzerland is a great place to go be bored. It is beautiful there. You can forget all the things they're babbling about. Look out the window, it's very pretty there. But while I was there, we were traveling from Bern to Zurich. We're in scary European buses. We're passing this town, and it's around lunchtime. I'm seeing all these kids out in the streets. And I said to the Swiss gentleman next to me, who was a member of their version of Congress, and I said to him, "Why are the kids out in the streets? Is this a holiday?" And he said, "No, it's lunchtime." And I said, "Okay, why aren't the kids in school?" And he said, "It's lunchtime." "Why aren't your kids in school? It's the middle of the day." And then he looks at me with this pained expression on his face, and he said, "You mean your American TV shows, that's real? That you have these cafeterias and food?" I just kind of assumed that was always just some sort of plot device. "No, what do your kids do for lunch?" He said, "Well, 2 pieces of bread and some ham. Go to McDonald's. Y'all have McDonald's, right?" He was flabbergasted by the idea. And he talked about how, we go on and said, well, gosh, I mean, you really have big yellow buses? I mean, he was just trying to unpack that. All the stuff they'd see on American TV, they just kind of thought were silly kind of, plot device things, not reality. And he was just horrified. He said, "Well, how much are you spending on education? If all these things you do," again, I'm going to be clear, I'm not suggesting that Lubbock ISD should tomorrow get rid of its school cafeterias or get rid of its buses. I am suggesting that if you're serious about reining in costs of government, you and I need to start having some real serious conversations about what we expect out of government. Because the inmates are currently running the asylum, and the inmates are spending your money at ever-increasing levels, which is why we have the 4th highest property tax burden in the state, in the nation. Addressing property taxes, though, even without this esoteric tangent I just took us down about education spending, you can actually begin to eliminate about 50% of the property tax burden by attacking the school maintenance and operations tax. And that's the proposal that Don Huffines, who was on the screen earlier, Don Huffines and Grant Fuhrer talking about, and that now Greg Abbott has adopted. Taking the $27 billion budget surplus, $27 billion that's been collected out of the economy that they did not know was coming in, or else they would have spent. In the past, when there have been budget surpluses, the Texas legislature just spends it, and they grow government. That's why government is bigger today than it's ever been, is because the Republican legislature gets back and says, "Oh, we have a budget surplus," and they use it to grow government. So now, this $27 billion sitting in the state surplus accounts, that $27 billion, Greg Abbott said, will spend at least half on property tax relief. Dan Patrick says more on property tax relief. Dave Phelan wants to spend a lot less, like maybe 0 on property tax relief. That's a whole different question. Spending $27 billion out of the surplus puts us on a pathway to, within about 7 years, being able to eliminate the school maintenance and operations tax. So that represents about a 60% tax cut for most Texans, without any increase in government anywhere else, without any increase of tax, without an income tax, without higher sales taxes, without any other kind of tax increase. So we need the legislature to do that pretty quickly. You had the new Tax Foundation report come out just this past week showing that Texas has now dropped out of the top 10 best business climate for taxes in the nation. We're now number 13 in the nation. So yay, Texas, we're number 13 in taxes. We need to get past this idea that we can be better off than California and still be something worthwhile. There are a lot of states that are better off than California. The question is Texas doing the best it can? And right now, we're number 13 in the nation, and the Wall Street Journal, in writing about this Tax Foundation report, said, we're trending in the wrong direction. Texas is going the wrong way. Some of you, well, most of you in this room are old enough to remember the 1980s and 1990s. Well, some of you are old enough you don't remember the 1980s and 1990s. That's a different question. 1980s and the 1990s, if you were an entrepreneur, if you wanted to start a business, you didn't come to Texas, you went to California. And you see how quickly California went from a pro-small business entrepreneurial haven to the hellscape that it is today. How quickly that happened, because their citizens didn't get involved, didn't engage. You and I have this neat inflection point in 2023 as relates to property taxes with a $27 billion budget surplus. Every dollar that they don't use of that to reduce property taxes is a step closer to being like California. Every dollar that they do use towards reducing and eliminating our property tax burden is a step towards being what Texas can be. So property taxes are critical. I would submit to you though, and I'm gonna sound like the broken record a couple of times here, that question about Democratic committee chairs is a question that will plague the state throughout the legislative session, particularly on property taxes. Democrats actually don't care about your property tax burden. What they care about is getting the maximum amount of money out of your pocket and put it in the government, because Democrats actually do see the public schools as employment generators for their people. That's how they see public education. That's why more than 50% of people who work in public education don't work in the classroom. More than 50% of the salary dollars that go into public education are spent outside the classroom, because they're hiring up lots of people to administrate and to manage and to, think why little boys should be able to chop off body parts and call themselves little girls and all those kind of things. That's what they're spending all this money on over there. The Democrats are fine with that. They want that. They view schools as indoctrination machines. So the Democrats really have no interest in cutting property taxes, and we've now seen twice in the last 20 years Democrats chairing the tax writing committees. It's insane. A Democrat is currently the chair of the Public Education Committee. Any effort to reduce school property taxes will have to go through the Public Education Committee in the Texas House. And if the Democrat chairs that committee, what do you think the chances are of it moving? About zero. So again, property taxes, critical for the future of the state. If you have some, inkling that it might be good for Texas to not slip further in the rankings of the comparative analysis of the states, we need to address property taxes. If you're thinking somewhere that you want your kids to have slightly better economic opportunities than you currently have, we've got to do something about property taxes. All those things will be made or broken in this session, because that $27 billion is going to burn a hole through the pocket of 150 members of the Texas House and 31 members of the Texas Senate. They are going to use that $27 billion for something. And if they're not using it for property tax relief, they are using it to grow government. And when you take $27 billion and you layer that on top of the $225 billion currently spent by the state every 2 years, you can say goodbye to our economic prosperity as a state, because they've now dug a hole that can only be filled by taking ever more dollars out of your pockets. I'm about to now talk about a topic that some people will say requires more money. I would say the answer is not more money, it's a different result. That's border security. Border security, the typical answer that we hear, and you are going to hear as it relates to that $27 billion, we need to take 5, 10, 20 billion dollars out of the surplus. Let's put it towards border security. And a lot of our friends and neighbors go, oh yes, use the surplus to secure the border. You could stack $100 bills 10 feet tall and 20 feet deep along the border, and the border will not be secure if we do not change our thinking. The thinking towards the border is a porous one. The border does not exist for most of our politicians. until we begin to see the border as a real thing that must be defended and protected, no matter how much money that is spent down there is going to be completely irrelevant. Operation Lone Star. You look at the now several $1 billion that the state of Texas spent theoretically for securing the border. The border is more porous today than it's ever been. More, and again, a lot of that's Washington, D.C. Yes, that's true. But this is where you have the uncomfortable rub of our Constitution. Who came first? The states or the federal government? Well, I know the answer to that. The states came first. Who controls the federal government? Is it the federal government or is it the states and the citizens? Well, it's the states and the citizens. The federal government is the servant to the citizens and to the states. And yet, we have increasingly allowed this very European notion of federal sovereignty to invade our relationship of the states as it relates to the federal government, where rather than states saying we are going to do a thing, we instead look at the federal government and say, oh, may I do a thing? And for better or worse, our governor, Greg Abbott, set aside whenever you think of him and you think of the things he's done as governor, at the end of the day, Greg Abbott is a judge. That he was a lawyer for a few years, then became a judge, was a judge for a long time, a district court, appellate court, Supreme Court, and then stepped into Attorney General for a few years. Is still kind of like being a judge. You write opinions, you give people legal advice, that's it. As governor, he has still been thinking like a judge in a lot of ways. And judges rely, and you want this of a judge, you want a judge who relies on precedents. You want a judge who looks and sees what the vast number of previous judges have said about a thing, and you act in that. Because you want a judicial system that is safe and predictable. That is a positive in a judicial system. As a governor, you want someone who is serving you and jealously protecting your rights. That's what you want out of a governor. And Greg Abbott has looked at the problem at the border and said, well, no one has ever been aggressive at dealing with the border at the state level. And at the state level, we just wait for the federal government to act. So Greg Abbott, as governor, has taken the safe approach. The safe, legally speaking, the safe judicial position of following precedents, which is to say, doing nothing. Why? Because there is no precedence. What little bit of precedence that exists regarding state action at the border was a case decided in the early 2000s called Arizona versus the United States. The state of Arizona decided they were sick and tired of drug dealers and weapons traffickers coming across the border from Mexico, and their courts were being filled with them. And so the state of Arizona said, you know what we're going to do? We're just going to toss their sorry butts back across the border. That's what we're going to do. We're going to deport them ourselves because we can't get the stupid, Washington, D.C. to do anything about it. Well, as soon as they started tossing guys across the border, I think of like, some bar scene in some comedy where you grab the guy by the scruff of the neck and his belt, you toss him out the bar. They were kind of wanting to do that in Arizona with illegal aliens. Well, now suddenly the federal government got involved. Oh, well, you can't do that. And they went back and forth, and the Supreme Court issued this just complete wackadoo ruling, and this completely just unhinged, because there was no precedent, and judges don't like doing things outside of precedent, completely unhinged from reality, completely ignoring the U.S. Constitution, and said, you can't do this. Well, since then, there have been a lot of hints coming to the Supreme Court. Number one, they're willing to reconsider that. They kind of see it was not exactly a correct position. So here's Texas. We have 20,000 illegal aliens a week coming across our border. 20,000 is the number that we know for sure. That 20,000 number you see coming from DPS and Border Patrol is where someone in law enforcement or someone in Texas military forces is going 1, 2, 3, 4, 19,999, 20,000, okay? When they come across the detritus of folks who came across in the middle of the night that no one saw, they can't count those numbers. when they don't have an interaction, they can't count those numbers. So we know the number is well north of 20,000, but we know at least 20,000 a week are coming across. We also know, because of documents that were hacked and released to the public I guess 5 weeks ago, that the Mexican military is aware and okay with the fact that their officers are selling not only secrets and information to the cartels, but also military weapons and equipment to the cartels in that 10-mile stretch from the border, 10 miles in. They're well aware of it, and they don't want to do anything about it. And in fact, you read these documents and you find that the Mexican military senior command has ceded, and their law enforcement has ceded, a 10 to 20 mile buffer between the border and down south into their country. What this functionally means is that these cartels and the folks coming across, they are an invasion force. And the U.S. Constitution says a governor has the right to repel an invasion. And we have erred in allowing our government officials to talk about illegal immigration, and we use that word illegal immigration. We talk about it like it's a judicial issue. It's not a judicial issue. Too many of us have a 1984 mindset as it applies to the border. We think of the fellow whose wife and kids, he lives outside Monterey, and horrible economic environment, and he's got a wife and a couple of kids back home, and so he sneaks across the border and he takes a job no one wants to do for half the price, and he sends 99% of it back home, and he lives in poverty so that his wife and kids can have a better life. And you and I go, yeah, I kind of like that guy. We kind of like that fellow. Okay, that's not who's coming across today. That is not who's coming across today. That guy was breaking the law. That was an illegal action, but he had sympathy for the criminal because he's taking care of his wife and his kids. All right. The people coming across today are coming across to take advantage of our welfare system. They're coming across to abuse our criminal justice system. They're coming across selling fentanyl and other illegal drugs, or they're trafficking weapons, or even worse, trafficking humans, participating in the human trafficking networks. This is no longer a question this is no longer a judicial question. This is an invasion. And until our elected officials recognize what's going on at the border as an invasion, no amount of money solves the problem. Because there is a very inexpensive solution to an invasion, particularly when you're talking about a third world country with thuggish, profit-driven cartels and the mightiest military on the face of the planet. There's actually a very low cost in dollar and in human life on our side answer to that. And that involves being willing to use military force to stop folks from coming across. Because here's what we know for sure. When this has happened, and it has happened several times along the border, where some 12-year-old with an automatic weapon on the other side, getting $100 a month from the cartels, gets sloppy and shoots across the border. What do our guys do? What are they allowed to do under rules of engagement? Shoot back. And you know what happens when they shoot back? Everyone who's about to come across the border turns around, heads back home. Because they're actually not interested in losing a life down there. They're not actually interested in dying for the cartel cause. Okay? We have to start treating this like an invasion. Until we treat it like an invasion, we'll never want to solve the border problem. Which is what's happening in Arizona. Now, usually, I always joke, I can't keep track of the other 57 states. I know what's going on in Texas, and that's about it. Arizona, which apparently is a state, who knew? They have a very interesting gubernatorial race still going on. Brandon Walton's our managing editor. We flew him out there yesterday because of the impact that gubernatorial race is going to have, principally on border security. Carrie Lake, who is the Republican there, Carrie Lake has said that her first day in office, if elected, she's going to declare an invasion at their border. And that's going to do a couple of things. One, that will allow her to use all the military assets of Arizona, including the Army National Guard, Air National Guard, to to repel the invaders, to take folks who have already come across and toss them back across. She's baiting that fight with the federal. She's not baiting that fight with the cartels on the south. She's baiting that fight with the evil alien masters in Washington, D.C. She's setting up that conflict with them. And that is what I would suggest Greg Abbott should be doing also. And the problem for Greg Abbott is going to be politically, that Greg Abbott, who hasn't been doing it in Texas but could, Texas is this is a fun fact. I think the number is 80%. It might be something like 7%. It's somewhere between 60 and 80% of the number of the United States Army are Texans. That's kind of a fun fact. Do you know why? Because about 60 to 80% of the United States Army passes through Fort Hood, and at some point they go, oh, you mean I can say I'm from Texas and not pay income taxes like I do in California? Oh yeah, I'm a Texan suddenly. You got all these guys with weird accents who claim to be Texans suddenly. It's fantastic, right? We have all this equipment, all this personnel, all these platforms from which to take care of our problems. The governor of Texas can use under the U.S. Constitution. And so Greg Abbott's going to be there saying, oh, well, yeah, I was waiting for Carrie Lake to do it, So we need Carrie Lake to get elected so that the governor of Texas can possibly take an action. Even if the governor doesn't, you've got a legislature coming into session, you need a legislature passing resolutions calling on the governor to take that action. Greg Abbott needs to understand that his role as governor, as outlined in the U.S. Constitution, allows him to protect our state. He took an oath to defend our state from all enemies, foreign and domestic. He should be doing that right now at the border. The fact that you and I have continued to treat, give everyone in politics a pass because we're treating it like some sort of judicial, if only we had enough zip tie handcuffs, then all the situation would go. No, that's not the solution. We need to have a different attitude. And hopefully, this next legislative session, we will see lawmakers do that. But again, it goes back to the simple question, Democrat community church. Why? Because the Public Safety Commission, the Texas House, which oversees not only DPS, but also Texas military forces, has at 2 different points been controlled by a Democrat in Texas. So these are the kind of things you and I have to be paying attention to. If we want to see action on the issues that matter to us, you and I have to make sure that we're following the rules and following the personnel that are driving the situation in Austin. I've now got all this off my chest, and quite honestly, I feel so much better. This is very therapeutic for me. I was yelling at the windshields as I was driving, listening to the radio. Sounds like you people have been really nice. What issues are y'all caring about? What issues are y'all tracking this session? Yes, sir.
Well, your 2 issues are my 2 issues. Number 1, my mother and my grandmother are Mexican, but they were legal. And last week, I was talking to a paramedic from UMC. We had 11 kids in Lubbock, Texas, overdosing fentanyl. Last year, talking to a border agent at a convention I was at, this border agent told me 91,000 kids per year, that's 8-year-olds to 18-year-olds, get sexually transferred from Mexico to the United States or United States to Mexico.
Right.
I talked to a lady where her daughter was taken and drugged, and they started to take her down to Mexico so they can take her off to some other country so she can be an enslaved prostitute somewhere else. The other thing was, I was a teacher for 36 years. I did extracurriculars. When I first started at a 2A school, there's a superintendent, 2 principals at 2A school, and 2 secretaries. When I retired from teaching a few years ago to go on to other jobs, there was more aides, more extra stuff than there was teachers. Almost like probably for every teacher is 4 or 5 non-teaching people.
Right.
And they're all getting paid. And on the school lunch thing, I argued with the superintendent one time because we were going to lay off teachers. The little school that's close to here, short on the budget. We're about 80 grand short. And I said, in my extracurricular, we provide meals when they go somewhere. So do some of the other ones. I said, let's cut the meals, maybe cut some of the free lunches. He goes, no. And after months of arguing, finally turned around and says, we get money from the feds and the state. Every time your kid gets a free lunch, we get money. It's all tied.
Yeah. So I'll tell you a very funny. You'll be able to relate to the story. So Eames Independent School District, it is I think the wealthiest school district in Texas. There in western Travis County. A number of years ago, I had a friend who was only at the time a multimillionaire. He and his family moved into the Eames district. He took a job in Austin to be the CEO of a company that was going to be going public. And the reason, and he did that for a living. He would be moved around, mainly around the state, around the country, helping companies go public. Squeaky clean guy that you need when you're taking a company public, trade stock. They move into the Eanes Independent School District with their 2 daughters, and things are busy and hectic. And about a month into it, my friend realizes that they have not been giving their kids lunch money, and he's horrified. Oh my gosh, I've been so busy. This is a rapid move, and all the stuff going on. This is what my kids have been using their allowance to pay for lunch. He was, oh no, it's not how we do things in our family. And so he went to his daughter said, oh, I'm so sorry, been paying for your lunch. How much do I owe you for your lunch money? Oh, school lunches don't cost anything. What do you mean they don't cost anything? No, they just check us off, and we don't have to pay for lunches. So they go into the school district and find out that the school district had decided to just mark, because his family came in the middle of the semester, wouldn't mark him as if they were qualified for the free and reduced lunch program. I mean, this is a guy who was making, $10 million a year. To say they didn't qualify would be an understatement, right? He was horrified by this, but the school district got an extra cash. This is the wealthiest school district in the state, and yet they're playing these games. He just a few more bucks in to game the system. He ended up having to hire a lawyer to sue the school district to get their name taken off so he could pay the school district back $38 because he could not have some Wall Street, investigator find out that the CEO of this company was using the free and reduced lunch program. I mean, just horrible. We have all these crazy incentives in our system to recklessly spend other people's money. So yeah, just horrible.
Spend it or lose is what the schools always say.
Spend it or lose it. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I have 2 questions, but I want to clarify something first. Isn't it the Speaker of the House that appoints these chairmen of the committees?
Yes.
Okay. Was Dave feeling like Joe Strauss elected to Speaker of House with a large number of Democrats voting him in?
Yes.
He was, okay. So was our Representative Dustin Burrow voting along with the Democrats to vote Dave Phelan in as our Speaker of the House?
That would be a correct way to describe the situation. So just so you understand, so when between Joe Strauss and Dave Phelan was a fellow named Dennis Bonnen. He lasted only 1 term, did some pretty corrupt things that I got to help expose, and he got kicked out. That was kind of fun. But then, okay, so now you need a new speaker. So Dave Phelan showed up to the Republican caucus. All right, I've already got the support of 60 of the Democrats, so y'all are all for me, right? And he already had, 10 or 12 guys with him. And so they said, well, okay. And so only, I think 4, I can't remember, Tony Tinderhold, only like 4 members of the Republican Party then on the floor voted against him. He didn't have any opposition, Dave Phelan. But he went into it with the Democrats, then came to the Republicans and said, okay, you want to vote for me? So
that is so wrong.
Burrows went with the Democrats at that point. He ratified the Democrats' choice, I would say.
So they have wield a lot of power.
The Democrats?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Look,
In a 20-year
saying, dance the one who brung you, And I think that you've got, but I suggest to you, it's not so much as much power over him. Remember, it's the idea of there's this myth in politics. Some rich guy comes in and buys off a politician. I've actually never found this to be true. What tends to happen is politicians who want to do scummy things find some rich guy who will subsidize it. Right? They're going to do it anyway. The politician just pays them to do what they were going to do anyway. Same thing's true here. Dave Phelan wants to do the stuff the Democrats. So you look at the guy's background, look at his history, look at his voting record. He's not with conservatives. Right? He's a Republican because of where he's from. He has to be. And so when you sit there, it's not that the Democrats control him. It's that by having the Democrats, he's able to do the things that he wants to do. And that is kill a lot of the things that Republicans care about.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Oh.
So I'm new here.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
New here from where?
Georgia.
Oh, breaking my heart. Not kidding.
Unfortunately, they've become like California in the South. So So who's the better candidate to be Speaker of the House, and how do we help to make that happen?
So, I mean, you know, if the Speaker of the House were something that we could all vote on, I'd vote for Tony Tinderhold. The problem is the 150 members of the House get to vote on who the Speaker of the House is. Like all things, I would suggest to you that, number one, we should all be working as citizens towards a day when whoever holds whatever seat is not relevant, because we as the citizens have cowed all of them into understanding that they serve us, and that, you know, whatever label is next to the name, whoever they are, they understand they work for us. I mean, that's the distant ideal. You know, when I go to Chick-fil-A, I know for sure, don't order a 12-pack of nuggets and large fries and sweet tea, that when I get around to the corner, those magically delicious waffle fries are going to be in that bag, along with 12 nuggets and a large sweet tea, and I'm a happy camper, right? We should have that same expectation with government. So, you know, so it doesn't matter to me, it does not matter to me what homeschooler is working the drive-thru that night, right? That doesn't matter, okay? It doesn't matter at all, because the expectation has been set that that's what happens when you show up at Chick-fil-A. That should be the same thing with government. The way that you end up with a better House Speaker right now is every single, you know, Republican in the districts of Republicans having very clear, concise conversations with their state rep. So for you guys, that would be with Rep-elect Carl Tepper and with incumbent state rep Dustin Burrows, saying, I honestly don't care that you and your families vacation together. I honestly don't care that your kids, you know, sing Kumbaya in the halls of the Capitol and it's so cute. I don't care, I don't care, I don't care, I don't care, I don't care. Here's my expectation, you know. And then all of you make sure he understands that he is responsible personally for you, for every piece of legislation, every priority that doesn't pass. That you hold him. You don't hold the Democrat responsible, from Dallas County, who gets the credit for killing. You don't hold that Democrat responsible. The Democrats do what Democrats do. All right. You hold, and too often we don't want to be that person. Oh well, I'll give my state rep a pass because he's such a nice guy, and his spouse is just so lovely, and we get passes on all these things that we would never do in our businesses. But what this requires, and here's the rub, and it sounds easy to say this right now. Oh yeah, we're holding accountable. We then don't. The reason when you go to New York City, there are guys working 3-card Monte tables on the street, is because they have learned that when Texans show up in New York City, you can get a couple $100 out of them with 3-card Monte. And when we stop giving them our cash, they stop having the game. Right? The same is true with everything involving politics. You and I keep rewarding bad behavior by re-electing these cats who are doing the bad thing. When you've got a teenage boy with car keys and whiskey, bad things happen. Okay? When you allow it to happen every weekend, bad things keep happening. It's only when an adult says, "Okay, teenage boy, no car keys and no whiskey," that's now when people stop dying on your streets. And I think that it's each one of us have to get out of the mindset of saying, well, it's Dustin Burrows' fault or Carl Tepper's fault. No, it's our fault. It's the expectation that we have set, and it's what we have allowed. But having those conversations, setting that standard, talking to your neighbors, talking with your friends, all those kind of things, is what begins changing our culture from a passive recipient of government to an active ruler in our government. And it's going to take time. I mean, it is going to take a little bit of time. But depending on how much fear you can inspire in your state rep, the better. And I keep using the word fear, and I'm sorry, it makes some people uncomfortable. I do not need my legislator to like me. Just like I don't need my employees like me. I mean, it's nice that my employees, I think they like me. I think Brandon like me. I think my employees like me. I hope they like me. Okay. But at the end of the day, you know, I just need to do their job. I just need them to be competent. I don't need to go have drinks with them afterwards. I don't need to hang out on Saturday afternoon. Just need them to do their job. All those stuff, oh, that's great. If all those things happen too, that's fantastic. Yeah. But too many of us feel this urge to be friendly with our politicians. And that's, I would suggest, is the most important thing we can do, breaking among our friends and our family and our neighbors, is that attitude of, oh, I don't want to offend the politician. Do you worry about offending the waitress at, the restaurant who pours coffee on your wife? No, you don't worry about offending the waitress who pours coffee on your wife, because the waitress poured coffee on your wife. You're more concerned about your wife being scalded than about the waitress's tender feelings, right? And I think that's the same kind of attitude we have to take toward politicians. They've been scalding our rights and our liberties. Also, one of you, I can't let what you say something go, and my smarmy rejoinder. Since November 2020, 1.1 million people have registered to vote in Texas who had previously voted somewhere else. 1.1 million. And typically, as Texans, our response go, like I admit this, when I see a car, I see a house for sale in my neighborhood, and then I see the sign go down and a car with California plates go into the driveway, my reaction is to have my dog start peeing on their car. And I'm not proud of that. Okay? I'm a little proud of it. I'm not really proud of it. My dog just pees when she's California plates. That's another issue. But what our friends at the Defend Texas Liberty PAC, if you don't know this organization, Defend Texas Liberty PAC, they did a survey and polling and research on those 1.1 million new Texas voters this summer. What they found is that 59% of them are Republicans. And what they found is that the 1.1 million, 56% of them are conservatives. And what they found is of the ones who aren't Democrats and the ones who are Democrats and the ones who are not conservatives, when they asked them issue questions about property taxes and border security and social issues and education and all this kind of things, they found was overwhelmingly even those people agreed with what you and I think as kind of conservative positions. And so I think a lot of us as native Texans need to come to recognize that it's the people moving in who are probably saving our state, and it's our fourth and fifth generation neighbors who are screwing us over. And we have got, because the folks who are coming here, whether they come from Georgia or California or New York, wherever, those folks have come here knowing what they left, and they were leaving something and coming to something, and they have a little bit of zeal of the converted. They're now Texans, kind of thing. And you and I have to make sure that we're doing a better job of educating our those native Texans, maybe more so than the newcomers. So that's a bit of encouragement for us. Again, this is where that I mentioned that tax foundation study earlier, where we've gone from one point being like number 3 a number of years ago, now we're number 13. Suddenly we become more like California, where people are leaving rather than coming, and all those things get worse really, really quickly. So glad you're here.
Appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
Okay. This may be a difficult question to answer, but you're probably as good as anyone who's asked it. If there is a possible Texas financial crisis that would drive a chasm between Republicans and Democrats, where do you think it would come from?
If there is a financial crisis,
If there would be a prospective financial crisis in Texas that would drive a chasm between Republicans and Democrats in the legislature, what it would probably be, if possible?
given the current structure of the legislature, they all would eat all of us before they ever turn on each other. That is part and parcel of the problem. I think that where you do see the potential for conflict financially when it comes to Republicans and Democrats legislature is maybe on things like taxpayer funding of abortion, something when you talking about that issue, or perhaps on kind of general expansion of health and human services for would amount to kind of socialized medicine in Texas, that kind of thing. You will start to see cracks form in the uniparty alliance there, where they will fight on that. But they don't have to. The problem with Texas's budget system is that they don't have to, because we have the way the Texas government works, we have a structural surplus. There's really not a possible way for Texas to ever get into a financial crisis in the way that we think of in Washington, D.C., because one, we can't print money, and we don't have the ability to print money, and two, because the way they budget, the calculations used mean there's always extra money left. So when they come in the next session, they've got extra money to spend, and it's never been $27 billion before. So any financial problem that exists, 19 for you, 3 for you. They get to play that game and kind of paper it over.
If the dollar lost its reserve currency status, what would happen?
At that, you would still be in the same, if the dollar lost reserve currency status, but you would still be in the same position. You just have dollars that mean nothing. I don't think that you would see the Republicans and the Democrats in the state legislature really worried too much over. They would all just kind of conspire together in the current arrangement of things. Well, how do you squeeze more dollars? And that's not that's not positive. That's actually looking at what happened in the early 2000s, what happened back in the late 80s. We can look historically at what's happened when you've seen high inflation, we've seen dollars value. You see the legislators go, well, we're all this together. Let's go screw the taxpayer. They unify quickly under that. Yes, sir.
Scorecard reported, I think it was a Defend Texas Liberty PAC survey, that 59% of Texas voters said Texas had a right to vote on their own independence. What do you think about that?
That's an interesting question. So, those kinds of are always kind of fun discussions, particularly after we've all had a couple of adult beverages. But our founding fathers would be amazed that anyone could think that the Union was indissoluble, given how they all came around, right? On the other hand, as I went to public schools, so I might be wrong here, but I think in the 1860s there was a little bit of a kerfluffle over that question, and in my reading of history and my personal experience, intellectual arguments are trumped by bullets. That's always been kind of my understanding.
So our union isn't voluntary anymore.
Yeah, you can have the best argument against me in the world, but I know that my bullet ultimately wins, right? I mean, that's the way of the world, unfortunately, right? It'd be nice if my great ideas could stop the bad guy's bullet. That would be great.
So we should stay in the union so they don't kill us.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the Now, on the other hand, what I do like about the idea, what I do like about the conversation, why if I were to be polled, I'd say, oh yeah, sure, is because the discussion is important. The very nature of the discussion should be enough to make folks say, well, then what the kids in the room, what in the blazes is going on that you're having this conversation? They begin referring to it, I've seen on social media and some hoity-toity magazines and stuff of the national divorce. And at the end of the day, for as much as I don't like the idea of the other 57 states, mainly just because I like Texas, at the end of the day, I like the people in California. They all seem like pleasant folks. They have nice weather all the time, and you can ski in the morning and go to the beach in the afternoon. That's kind of fun, I don't think Maine actually exists, but I've been to Vermont in the fall, and it's lovely. You know, they actually have a fall. We have a day of fall. They have like, you know, a couple months of them. The trees turn, and then all the people, they sound funny when they talk, but they're all nice people. You know, so I don't want to be divorced from those people. On the other hand, if I were married to Nancy Pelosi, I'd probably have some gay commie in my house. And I'd invite him in. I want a divorce from Nancy Pelosi. I want a divorce from Joe Biden. I want a divorce from John Fetterman. I want a divorce from John Cornyn, for goodness sakes. I mean, those people are divorced from, you know. And I think that, so I think some of this is, by having this conversation, having that kind of conversation, is one where, for us to have the ability to define our terms, when the single saddest thing in the human experience in my mind is when people get divorced, when a husband and wife, that's the pinnacle of failure in my mind. Of the community, of the surrounding family, it's horrible. It's horrible, whole thing. When spouses have problems and they start talking about the S word and the D word, the nice thing about having that conversation is, now you can start addressing what the real problems are. That's when we start that's when we start saving marriages at that point. When everyone's pretending everything's fine is when things get really weird, and guys go out and have affairs, and women go out and start doing drugs, and all the different kinds of things that happen. Having the conversation is good, and that and I think it's unfortunate that we have reached a point where we can't have that conversation. And again, what that tells me is you really got to have the conversation. Everyone who's married, there are those times when you and your wife, you do not want to have that talk about that topic with your wife, period. Which is when it is the most important moment to have that talk with your wife at that moment. And I think the same thing true in our nation. Having that conversation.
So it sounds like you're personally opposed but open to having the conversation.
Yeah, and then opposed is also a strong word. My distant great grandfather's name Benjamin Rush, one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. And he's one of those guys who I look at and say he would be just twirled up in his grave at the idea that it's controversial, that some state might at some point in the future decide it doesn't want to be part of the union. That they literally fought a war to separate from, for transient causes. Need to make a case to a candid world, all those kind of things, right? Our founding fathers would not have had a millisecond of hesitation about, man, I wonder if Oklahoma should have a conversation about not being a state anymore. Because they literally stood in front of guys in red coats with muskets and said, "We're leaving." So. Yes, sir. Last question.
One of my pet peeves is that now that we're in the football playoff district, and a scholastic league has ruled that the top 4 schools from every district makes the playoffs.
Yeah.
And many of them will not have even winning records. And just think of the cost of the buses hauling around and the meals and the hotel rooms and all that. And then of course, in Lubbock during the holiday season, we have a tournament. We bring in 64 teams from all over the state.
Mm-hmm.
And that's paid out of school funds.
Right.
And then 2 years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, I saw a tournament in Perryton, Texas. There was a school from El Paso, went to the holiday season tournament in Perryton, Texas, up in the northeast corner.
Right.
And it was over 500 miles.
Yeah.
And I've talked to legislators about that, and they said, well, that's a scholastic league thing, but they're spending state educational funds.
Right. Yeah. Let's always remember when we're talking about education dollars. Let's remember what we're talking about. We're talking about the taxpayers' money, money that came from your pocket, right? And my dad's football coach when I was growing up. You know, I owe the first 12 years of my life to high school football, bright lights, everything else. That's fantastic. But at some point, we have gotten things so far out of kilter. You know, as a kid, maybe as a Christian, you go to a football stadium and it was, you know, you didn't want to sit too far back in the seat because you'd fall through the hole of a metal bleacher, right? And today, you know, you've got, you know, these facilities that not only rival but exceed college, even professional facilities. There's a fellow whose brother played football for the Green Bay Packers, who, you know, that does the unique team. They don't have a taxpayer-funded football stadium. It's funded by the, you know, by the members of the, you know, the ownership club of the Green Bay Packers. A little different system, and their facilities apparently aren't that great. Came to Allen High School in the Metroplex, where they have very famously the $70 million football field they used 3 times before cracks started appearing. They had to spend millions more to fix the cracks. Just insane. And he's going, these facilities are nicer than what we have in our professional football team. Yeah, I mean, just insane that what we've done in public education. And that dollar spent on, you know, busing kids 500 miles from El Paso to Perryton for a football game, you know, that is the very same bucket. I mean, the taxpayer, you know, don't bore me with, oh, M&O and INS and state dollars, local dollars, and all the kind of, don't bore me, those are all taxpayer dollars. That same bucket, that same taxpayer pocket came, is what could have gone to pay a math teacher more. That could have been used, you know, to fund, you know, new books in the library, although given some books library, maybe you don't want that. Anyway, you know, there's so many things, or just leave the money with the taxpayer. But again, this is where we have to have, as citizens, this very grown up, very adult conversation about what do we expect out of public education. I was a newspaper reporter for a long time, and what I can absolutely tell you as a newspaper reporter, no one in the places I worked in the paper gave a rip about kids' test scores. Because if we had a newspaper, if the front page of the paper said, here's how the kids did in math, people would yell at us. Because they expected on Saturday morning newspaper was, how did the football team do last night? And until you and I ask more questions about our school, about academics than we do about football, well, they're going to keep funding football. You know? And you know, all these problems, you know, all these issues keep coming back to the mirror we need to hold up to ourselves first and foremost. So, all right, the little beeping thing said I've gone over time. I very much apologize. Thank y'all for letting me be with you. I really appreciate it.